Hello, this is Shannon, the president of Light After Loss. We are doing some informational interviews for Mental Health Awareness Month. 1 in 5 people struggle with mental illness. Over 130 people die by suicide every day. Light After Loss is a trauma-focused support system for survivors of suicide loss. We recognize these are traumatic times that we are experiencing. For that reason, we feel it's important to stop the silence and continue the dialogue surrounding mental health, addiction, overdose, and suicide. This week we welcome Brittany Reed. She is the director of Coleman's Mobile Crisis Services. She has some very valuable information to share with us. I hope you tune in.
All right, so I am here. Welcome Brittany Reed from Coleman Crisis Services. So you guys are under the umbrella of Coleman Professional, correct? So tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do at Coleman and a little bit about Coleman.
Sure. So my name is Brittany Reed. I'm the Director of Mobile Response for our Coleman Crisis Services. Coleman has been in existence since like 1976, starting in Portage County, but we're a nonprofit community mental health agency. So we provide behavioral health services in about 10 counties throughout Ohio. And Coleman has been in Stark County since 2005. And then recently, August 2018, we took over the crisis services for Stark County. And so Coleman's mission is really to foster recovery, build independence, and change destinies, which we do that through our behavioral health services. So in Stark County, like our services range depending on the county, but in Stark County, we offer counseling, case management, psychiatry and nursing, peer support, residential, supportive employment. We have social services, and then also our crisis services. So we have 3 locations in Stark County, 2 outpatient offices, 1 in downtown Canton and 1 in Alliance, and then our crisis services located at the Crisis Center in Canton.
Yeah, so you guys, to me, have always kind of been a one-stop shop. If it exists, you have it somewhere. And as far as Light After Loss is concerned, I probably really need to get a list of all of the counties and what services are in each county, because we get a lot of phone calls from out of Stark County. In fact, we get a lot of phone calls from out of state even.
Oh,
so
wow.
we just really link people up with services where they're located. So that's good to know that you're not just Stark County, that you guys really are all over and you have so many services. So as far as, we go back a little bit, we were on the NAMI board together. I don't even remember what I was doing on the NAMI board at the time that you came on, but so I got to see you kind of go through your career journey, and it's been awesome. And when you got the mobile crisis, the director of the mobile services, I was like, yes, like it is. I was so excited because I know you'll serve it well. So talk a little bit about your journey just in mental health. Where did you start? How did you end up where you are?
Yeah. So a big inspiration for me to even be in this field is my mom. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so it's very close to my heart in serving people who need help. And so I started actually in 2012 as a case manager intern with Coleman. And then I was hired in our residential site. And then when a full-time case management position opened up, I shifted into that position while I was in grad school, getting my master's for counseling. And then I was a counseling intern. Then I became a counselor at Coleman with our transitional age youth team. And then when this director position opened up, I moved into that position. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything in Stark County.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, if you start in Stark County, that's how you get to an opportunity to do a lot of things. So, talk about your role at Coleman Crisis and what specifically Coleman Crisis Services provides.
Yeah, so I'm the director of our mobile response program, and so we have a youth team and an adult team. So both our multidisciplinary team, our youth team, we have counselors, case managers, and a family peer support specialist. And then our adult team, we have counselors and case managers. Our Coleman Crisis Services is pretty robust for the county. So we answer the Stark County Crisis Hotline. We're also a site that answers for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And we also are an after-hours answering service for a lot of the agencies within Stark County. So if you call the homeless hotline after hours, you'll hear from us. And so we're also considered a Project Dawn site, which means we answer the opiate hotline, and we're also a naloxone distribution site. We have a 13-bed voluntary crisis stabilization unit, which is kind of like the middle ground between someone being in the community and someone being in the hospital. So it's completely voluntary. It's just a safe place for people to kind of stabilize and get that support in hopes that hospitalization is not necessary. And then we also see walk-ins. So anyone can walk into our crisis center 24/7 and talk to a counselor.
Yeah, and I really wanted to emphasize the fact that you guys are not just answering the line, the 452-6000, that you are, if somebody calls the National Suicide Lifeline, that it may get directed towards you guys.
Absolutely.
And then I also read that the state of Ohio started a Corona Care line. And am I correct when I say that is 24 hours, but it's only so like they staff it from 8 to 8, and then after hours it goes to the Suicide Lifeline, which means you are also answering those calls.
Correct. Yes.
You're answering any after hours services really goes to you guys.
Yes.
It's a huge responsibility.
It is.
Taking care of not only crisis, but just mental health across the board, drug and alcohol across the board, that any kind of call that somebody's going to pick up the phone and call for help, it's more than likely going to be you guys, especially if it's after hours.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't think people realize that. I think they, especially around here, if we say call the National Suicide Lifeline, they think they're going to be talking to somebody in, Timbuktu, and not necessarily the crisis center right down the street. I think that's important for people to know.
Absolutely.
So on that, how has the current situation and the pandemic impacted you guys? I know the latest statistic is that helplines, the calls into helplines is up over 800%. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. So I already had this kind of on my radar, but now with the closures, people not necessarily having the support they may need, I thought it was even more important. So how has the pandemic and the closures impacted your services and the calls coming in?
Right. I would say we definitely are getting more calls expressing anxiety over what's going on, and depression with the isolation and things like that. And we've been trying to reach out to individuals that we've worked with to try to offer more support as well. I think we're seeing a lot less people presenting to the hospital that might have if the virus wasn't around. So that kind of worries us, is like, where are these people that would have normally gone to the hospital for mental health concerns? But we are seeing more people walk into our crisis center than before the pandemic started.
Yeah, so maybe they know, maybe I don't want to go to the ER because of the virus, but the crisis center feels a little bit maybe more safe to them. Whatever reason, I'm glad that they're coming, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get to the nuts and bolts. What happens when I call the crisis number? And we'll give out the numbers, whether that's the local number, the 452-6000, or the National Lifeline. What happens when I call for help?
Yeah, so you'll speak to either one of our crisis assistants or a counselor, all well trained to help. They're here to talk through whatever is going on. If they have a concern about someone that they know, we can help provide some guidance, support, resources, kind of that consultation piece. Or we can just, be here to talk about whatever is bothering that person, stressing them out, whatever they're going through. That's also, our crisis hotline is also the line to call for mobile. And so if on the phone it's determined that a mobile response is needed, then the caller will most likely be transferred to one of our mobile counselors, who will kind of talk about what's going on, get more information, kind of get an understanding of the situation, how we can best respond. And so we let the person who's calling determine the crisis, because crisis is self-defined, so it could be different for everybody. And so if it's determined that the police might need to come with us, whether it's a really significant safety situation, or if it's nighttime, we will let them know, and we try to request CIT officers so they're well trained in crisis intervention. And I think our county does an amazing job at training our police force in these situations. So we'll let the caller know if we need that to happen, and answer any questions that the caller may have.
Okay. And I'm so glad that you spoke on the topic of crisis is self-defined, because
Yes.
my crisis is different than your crisis, that you do not need to be suicidal or having suicidal thoughts to call the helpline or to call the crisis number. That yes, if you are in a safety situation and it's life or death, call the number. But if you're not and you just need support, it's also there for that reason.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize that, oh, I can call this just for somebody to talk to kind of process out loud, especially in the middle of the night when not, maybe my friend or my spouse or my partner isn't awake, and I still need somebody to talk to. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, as well as the CIT piece. So CIT officers, crisis intervention specifically trained for mental health. I've been a part of that training. Starr County does an amazing job. I'm hoping one of our follow-up interviews will be with the coordinator and the co-coordinator of that program to give us a little bit more information. So I think a lot of people don't know, should I call the crisis number or the suicide lifeline, or do I call the police? Is there a right answer? What is the difference between those two, I suppose?
Right. I would say if there is a significant safety concern, so maybe the person has a weapon or is attempting to hurt themselves or just tried to hurt themselves, or if there's a medical emergency, obviously calling 911 is the most important thing to do. But outside of that, we encourage people to call us, especially before going to the hospital, because really we want to prevent people from going to the ER if it's unnecessary. And most of the time, the people that go to the ER, if they're not admitted, they just return home with little or no support on how to keep their safety in the community. So like when mobile response goes out, that's really a big piece that we focus on, is working a plan to keep that person safe. And really our goal is to keep them safe in the community, with hospitalization being the absolute last resort. So we really work on safety planning, involving their supports if that individual is okay with it, getting them linked to services and other resources that might help them, the youth, the family, whoever's involved, to keep them safe and in the community.
Okay. So definitely knowing the difference between, okay, this is a crisis and there may not be a safety issue, so I can call the crisis number. And then if there is imminent danger, definitely calling the police. But I also know that if you call either number, because when we're in panic mode or we're in a crisis, a lot of times we don't know what to do, so we just do something.
Right.
Whether you call the crisis center or call the 911 or for the police, they're going to get you directed in the right. If you feel like you need to call out the police, that's going to happen. If the police feel like crisis needs to come out, mobile crisis is going to be called. So worrying less about what is right or wrong, just picking up the phone and calling, and we'll get you in the right direction, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. All right. So what happens if mobile crisis comes out?
Yeah, so we have local licensed counselors that will come to you or wherever that person in need is. We travel throughout Stark County. Our response time is 30 minutes or less for any urgent need to get there right now need. Our average response time is about 20 minutes, depending on how far that person is in Stark County from our crisis location. But we do also have the ability to kind of schedule a time to come out at a time that might be better for that person, whether they're working or if it's a youth getting out of school or whatever it might be. If the need isn't got to get out there right now, we have that flexibility to be able to do that. So some of those situations, like maybe there's a crisis kind of brewing and we don't want it to get to that level if we can avoid it. So we can intervene before it gets to that crisis level. And then if there's a significant safety concern or if we're responding in nighttime hours, the police will respond with us to make sure that everyone stays safe. And we try to request CIT officers to go with us. And typically once we're there and we determine like the safety concern is no longer, we can tell the police that they can go, so that we don't tie up their time unnecessarily, and maybe it'll be more comfortable for that individual to talk. But the counselor will just sit down and talk with the person, the supports if they're available. Really our goal is just to get a big picture of kind of what's going on and what resources and supports and services would be helpful for that person. And we really do everything we can to keep them in their natural environment, with hospitalization being the absolute last resort. And I think the crucial piece too is we provide some short-term follow-up services after that mobile. So we can go out and do kind of like a crisis counseling session after the fact. We can provide case management to help get them linked to things that will help keep them safe in the community. And then like with our youth team, we have that family peer support specialist. And so we're really there to bridge that gap between that crisis situation and getting linked to ongoing services, supports, and resources.
Yeah, and I love the fact that it's not just one and done.
Right.
You realize that the crisis may have passed, and it will if they get the support that they need, but it's also the long term. So we can avoid a future crisis. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to get people stable enough to where they don't need to call. Kind of, as mental health people, we're always putting ourselves out of a job, I think.
Right.
Where we don't want to have to answer that crisis call, but we're here if needed. So being able to know that there is follow-up care is super. I think that's fantastic that you don't call and get one-time support, that there's wraparound services. So do you encourage, I know you said that you guys request a CIT officer. Do you encourage, if people call the police, do you encourage people to also ask for a CIT officer if they're having if there's a mental health flare to what's going on?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's good to know as well. I think we prompt, and when we work with NAMI, I know that's something they encourage as well. And which is why we're going to have a follow-up interview, because when we say that to people, a lot of people don't even know what that means. And so educating the community on why that's important.
Yes.
All right. So what if I show up to the crisis center, and what if it's not me? What if I show up with a family member or a friend, or I even call with a friend? How does that look when it's really not just me that's struggling, it's somebody I love?
Right. So we encourage anybody to call, especially if they, have concerns about somebody else. And we really try to take that support piece along with what we're doing, because that support person is going to remain with them through everything as well. And so if we can bring them in as part of the plan and really help that individual use their supports, that's what we're going to do. But anyone walking in will be seen by a counselor that day as well.
Awesome. We do QPR, which is the question, persuade, refer. And in those sessions, we encourage people to go with, or even if they're talking to somebody, to call in, because then you're not in the process alone, that you're the only one. And eventually, because QPR is for anybody, not necessarily trained counselors, the sooner you can get a trained counselor in that discussion, the better off. So we encourage people, go take them to the crisis center if you feel safe and they're going to be okay on the way there, or call in together. Make it kind of a team process and getting somebody else in on that call. So that's good to know as well.
Absolutely.
All right. What if, I'm kind of switching gears a little bit, what if you have lost someone to suicide?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously light after loss is we believe postvention is prevention, and
Mm-hmm.
the people we work with have lost someone to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if, there was not a crisis intervention and unfortunately somebody lost someone to
Mm-hmm.
suicide? What happens?
Mm-hmm. So if we are made aware of it, the process isn't consistent throughout the county. So sometimes when the police are at a scene that has happened, they can call us out and we can come offer support to the family in the moment. And so that we also provide that follow-up piece. And we're always available 24/7, 365 for when that person is ready. We can provide that support and resources, whether it's linking them to their own behavioral health services, or providing resources for like Light After Loss, or Summit Psychological has a suicide loss survivors support group. So we're always there. And if we know about it, we'll reach out and kind of put the ball in their court and say, hey, we're here if you need us. If you want resources, we're here. But you reach out whenever you're ready. So we try to provide that. The schools do an amazing job with their own postvention plan if there is a loss that impacts the school district. And so they do a really good job at wrapping services around their students.
Yeah, and I feel through my own experience and working with other survivors, I've come to know was not just me. When we refer people to back to the crisis line or crisis services, because, the reason we do postvention is prevention is because survivors of suicide loss are at an increased risk of suicide themselves. So there is a crisis intervention piece there.
Mm-hmm.
They are, when we try to encourage people to come or survivors to come, they have another barrier because there is an emotional piece there. Survivors feel abandoned by their loved ones, by the system, by, insurance and mental health, managed care system. And so sometimes there can be, that extra barrier where they feel like the system has failed them. So I don't want to go back into the system. And so that was another point of me kind of coming on, knowing that anger, that grief, that loss, that abandonment is absolutely real. But at the same time, being able to work through that and re-engage in the system is going to be super important long-term. And I get both sides of that. So being hopefully at some point in the future, don't know when, don't know how, but, survivors and working with the Crisis Center and Stark County Mental Health Board, that there will be a loss team and survivors will be walking with other survivors to re-engage in the system, because I think it's a barrier getting them to re-engage, especially if their loved one was involved in the mental health system. It's hard for them to rely on that system afterwards. So, so knowing that they still can call and that, you will give them the resources and send them our way or send them Summit Psychological as a great group. So, that the crisis line is for them too, even though the crisis may have not, has come and gone, that now that crisis is their crisis, and being able to engage in the system. So anything that we have missed as far as your services, I know you said you have a 13-bed voluntary where if somebody feels like they need the extra support, they're worried about their own safety, they can go in voluntarily and get that, which is awesome. Can you touch a little bit on the hospitalization side of, okay, this is a significant safety issue, what happens?
So we really incorporate that person into that decision making, because we never want it to be a surprise. That's not going to do them justice. That's not going to help them want to reach out for help in the future. So we really try to do everything we can to safety plan with them and explore other options before even pursuing hospitalization. And so we really try to keep that mindset at the forefront. And so we don't have a psychiatric facility yet in Stark County. I know there's one that's going to be opening up soon. So right now, the biggest barrier with hospitalization is not having something in county and people having to go far away. So we try to keep that in mind as well and do everything we can to keep them safe. I think that's another point of our service, especially with like our mobile response service, is we want to prevent them from having to accrue those bills and to, spend their time in the ER if they don't need to. And our service is way more cost effective, both in the short term and long term, because I know sometimes people don't want to call because they're worried about that financial barrier. And so we do see everybody regardless of their ability to pay. We are an extension of healthcare, so we do ask for insurance. But if someone doesn't have insurance, Starkmar has been extremely generous with helping cover the costs of services. Coleman will never harass people to pay a bill. So we work very hard to make sure that a person and family won't be financially burdened by seeking help. So again, like our services are more cost effective, both in short term and long term compared to visiting the ER, unnecessarily. And so we keep that in mind because we don't want anyone to be burdened in addition to what they're already going through.
Okay, so I heard three really important things. The financial piece, the financial barrier is real. A lot of people, they don't have insurance. I find that it is more, and I don't know if it's just the population we serve, kind of what they say, working poor. I have insurance, but I can't afford my copay or my deductible. So if I go and I have to pay my copay every week for counseling, then I can't buy groceries. And, having to make those really tough decisions. So insurance is great, but there's a financial piece that is still too much for people. So it sounds as though none of that matters when it comes to Coleman and crisis services.
Right.
Okay.
Do everything we can to try to prevent any unnecessary burden for them.
Okay. And then the hospitalization piece, I know, having worked with people who were resistant to go to crisis, they were having a crisis, but they were worried. They didn't want to go. They didn't want to call because I don't want to be hospitalized. The goal is not hospitalization. It is stabilization.
Yes.
Being able to plan enough safety and then enough follow-up services that keeping you out of the hospital is kind of the goal.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I don't know what the other one was. There was another important point there. If you can remind me what that is. Let me see. Do you think I'm missing anything? Are we missing anything when it comes to crisis, Coleman, support?
I think we talked a little bit about like prevention. And so I think if anyone is struggling with mental health, but maybe it's not at a crisis level yet, the biggest thing would be to seek your own, behavioral health services. And I would even encourage people to kind of plan ahead for a crisis situation. So I think we do a really good job at home of having like okay, if there's a fire or a tornado, what is our plan, but we don't do that with health. And I think that's something that we really see, especially with families, is that there is no plan. And so when a crisis happens, it's even more chaotic because, we're not able to think logically. It's a whirlwind and it's more chaos. And so I think if people can kind of put together their own kind of safety plan of like, okay, this is where I can tell that I'm starting to have more symptoms or more concerns that might lead to a crisis situation. Here's my coping kit that I can have a whole bunch of coping skills in, and I can just pull it out and do the things inside of it. Or here are my people that I can talk to if I need help. Here are the numbers I can call. This is where I can go. That might help, one, empower the person to feel like they have control in a very chaotic situation. And also maybe give some peace of mind too of like, okay, even if that does happen, I know what I'm going to do. I have this plan and I'm going to be okay. And I think too, like there's a big push for self-care. And I think that's super crucial too, because that's our healthy foundation to be able to deal with whatever life throws at us. And so if we don't have a good self-care routine, then it's kind of like our foundation is cracked and we're not going to be able to manage, all that weight that life can throw at us. So I think those are really important things too, to think like proactively, what can I do to maintain my mental health and plan for if it were to get to a crisis level.
Which I think is something that kind of has come out of the current situation, trying to plan for the unplannable. You don't ever plan for a pandemic, but now knowing, okay, it is important to have a mental health plan, a self-care plan, knowing, okay, this is the local crisis number, this is the national number, this is the homeless hotline, this is, where I can find food assistance. Those numbers are super important to know, even if you think you'll never need them, because you never know when you'll ever need them. It's one of those planable things.
Right.
So on that note, we are going to post all of those numbers, but for the sake of if whoever's watching this video, what is if you're in Stark County, the local number that goes to crisis?
It's 330-452-6000.
Okay. And then what is the national hotline?
It is 1-800, I have it here, 1-800-273-8255.
And that's talk, right? The 8255.
Yes.
Talk, because that always helps me somewhat remember. It's always the three middle numbers that are the hardest to remember. And hopefully, because this was kind of coming down the pike, and I don't know where it's in the process, that the hotline or the lifeline is going to have a 3-digit, like a 911 code. I think that's in the works. I hope it happens sooner than later.
Me too.
Because that would make things so much easier to have just a number for mental health, kind of easy number to remember. And then as far as all of the other lines, like the homeless hotline, the food assistance, even drug and alcohol, which is probably something we should touch on, knowing that there is an increase in what we call self-medicating, and which, it has a ripple effect, increase in addiction, increase in overdose, which I know is already occurring. If somebody comes in with not only mental health, but drug and alcohol addiction issues, what are the options there?
So we have detox centers throughout Stark County. That is through ComQuest, and they're the big agency that focuses primarily on that substance use and mental health component. So if anyone comes in with those kinds of concerns, like part of our job is to make sure that they get where they need to be that's appropriate for them, or have resources. And so even if, they don't know who to call for food pantries or the homeless hotline, they can always call our crisis hotline and we can direct them where they need to go.
So that's perfect. We don't have to remember all these numbers. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So that number will get you to wherever you need to be.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think I love the term like self-defined crisis. If you don't have food and you're worried about your water being shut off and childcare, those are crises. Those are, life-changing, and yes, maybe not life and death right at the moment, but ultimately lead to bigger issues if you don't call and ask for help. So knowing that they can get all of those resources through that number is, I think, a really important thing for people to know. All right. Any final words or anything that you think is important as we close?
Call us anytime, 24/7, 365. We are here.
That's perfect. I think something that is important to mention is that your inspiration, your mom, is actually on our board.
Yes.
So that's, she was also a part of NAMI, so we're all kind of connected through that system. And she's now with us on Light After Loss, and has been such an amazing, support, and just, she has so much experience and knowledge and being able to help people and, work with nonprofits. So we're so happy to have her. I'm so happy that you're doing the mobile crisis, because that makes, when I send people and say, call this number, call Mobile Crisis, there is a sense of peace there that, yes, they're going to take care of you and you're going to be just fine. So I'm excited to have both of you.
And we're excited to have you in Light After Loss. It's a much needed resource.
Yes. Sadly, it is. I always remember why we are here, why I am here, that tragedy in some sense has to occur for us to provide support, and always remember that. But it's kind of the same with you. Glad that we're here when it's needed.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you taking the time today. And I know you guys are super busy, so to do an interview and kind of help us kick off Mental Health Awareness Month. Are you guys doing anything? I know it's a kind of different time. Are you guys doing anything for Mental Health Awareness Month, or?
We were asked by the Massillon mayor to do kind of like an educational series focused on mental health and different topics and things like that. So we're doing that. And then this week we've kind of done like a Coleman Spirit Week. So today's the first day and we wear our Coleman gear, Coleman colors. So we're trying to keep staff engaged as well.
Yes. And I think they say that mental health will be, or is, I think already, kind of the next wave of all of this. And I definitely, being a frontline worker in the past, worry about my counseling friends because vicarious trauma, burnout. So being able to make sure you're taking care of each other and taking care of yourselves is going to be super important. If there's anything we can ever do, I appreciate that. Mayor Kathy is awesome. I'm so glad that she asked you guys to do that. She is a huge advocate for mental health. So glad that she's involved there. She was one of our guest appearances at our benefit concert, and we appreciated that. So if there's anything you ever need from Light After Loss, just let us know. We are going to send people your way.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk again. Hopefully see each other like face to face.
Right.
Right? Because
it'll be so nice.
Yes. All right. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Once again, we want to thank Brittany Reed for taking the time to talk with us and share some important information. Want to reiterate some of the important touchstones that she talked about, and asking for help. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. None of us are designed to do this on our own. We're all struggling with something that most people don't know about. And you are not alone. There is a lot of help out there. Sometimes the hardest step is taking the first step to make that call. So 3 ways to seek services: you can call, text, or show up. When deciding who to call, if you are experiencing a mental health crisis or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call the crisis number. But if there is imminent danger, somebody is going to hurt themselves or someone else, or someone has a weapon, and there is an imminent safety concern, call the police. Call 911. And when you talk to the person, the dispatcher, ask for a CIT officer. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Trained, and they have additional training to assess and deal with mental health crisis situations. If you end up calling the police or mobile crisis and the police need to be called or mobile crisis need to be called, they obviously know each other and are connected. It's a part of the process, a part of the system. So if you call the police and they feel like mobile crisis needs to come out and do an assessment, they will call mobile crisis. If you call mobile crisis and they feel the police need to be involved, they will call the police. So don't get so caught up on who do I call. If you don't know who to call, just call somebody and they will get you linked with the right services. Wanted to take a moment to address crisis center versus emergency room, especially during these times. A lot of people are not going to the emergency room because of the virus and worried about the spread, community spread. So if you are having a mental health crisis, can you go to the emergency room? Yes, absolutely. If it is just a mental health crisis, I encourage you, though, to go to the crisis center. And there's a couple reasons why. There is a financial implication. So if you go to the emergency room, they are going to physically assess you. So you're going to see a doctor. They're going to make sure you're healthy and safe in a physical way before they bring in the mental health component, which is okay, but there's going to be doctor and hospital charges that go along with that. At the crisis center, you kind of bypass that piece and you just get specialized mental health services. That being said, if you or someone you know has a physical injury from a mental health crisis, then go to the emergency room, call 911, because a physical assessment is important. If there is an injury, both physical and mental health need to be addressed. If there is no physical injury, then I encourage you to go to the crisis center to get specialized services. And then if you do end up going to the emergency department and it is only mental health, what they're going to do is they're going to physically evaluate you, make sure you are healthy, physically healthy, and then they are going to call in mobile crisis, and mobile crisis will come to the hospital. So going to the crisis center in some way eliminates that step, which also is a time factor. If you go to a crowded emergency room, you have to wait to be seen. They come in, physically assess you, and then they have to call mobile crisis. So it's almost an extra step, which means extra time before you're seen. So if you know this is a mental health issue, I need to talk to a mental health professional, I encourage you to go to the crisis center. You can also always call ahead to the crisis center and ask, should I go to the hospital? Should I come to the crisis center? And they will help you decide. They will kind of facilitate that conversation to help you know where to go. On that note as well, if you call the crisis center, you know you're going to go to the hospital, I would call the crisis center before you go, because then that also kind of eliminates that step of having the emergency room call after they've assessed you, that they're going to be aware that you're headed to the emergency room, and they may even meet you there. They may have mobile crisis meet you there, and that is in some ways saving time before you're seen. So 3 important reminders. You do not need to be suicidal to call the Suicide Lifeline. It is a call for people who are stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, going through some other mental health crisis that is self-defined. You can hear that in Brittany's interview. A crisis to them is self-defined. What a crisis is to me is different than it is to you. So if you need assistance, call the number. They will direct you to the right people if they're not the right people. Our local Stark County Crisis Center also answers the National Lifeline. So if you call the National Lifeline, you may not be talking to somebody in Washington or Florida. You are talking to somebody right around the corner. And I think that's important for people to know. And finally, there is no financial barriers when you go to the crisis center. An inability to pay does not affect your services. They are linked with the mental health board. Services that cannot be covered are covered by the mental health board. And that includes even if you have insurance, but you can't afford your copay or you can't afford your deductible, and you're having to make some of those difficult choices of, do I go to counseling once a week, or do I pay my electric bill, or do I pay for my prescription, or do I pay my mortgage? There are really tough decisions sometimes that have to be made. And going to the crisis center, they will help you navigate some of the financial assistance, but there also is no barrier that if you cannot pay, it is not going to mean that you're turned away for services. So they eliminate the financial piece of that. Important numbers. The Coleman Crisis number, the local number for Stark County, is pretty much the number I give the most, the 452-6000. It is also the number that is for almost anything in Stark County. They answer a lot of the other helplines after hours, so the homeless hotline after hours. and the National Suicide Lifeline gets routed that way. You can also text for HOPE to 741-741. That's also a national text line that is answered by our local crisis center. And the state of Ohio Mental Health Addiction Services started the COVID Care Line. They realized that there is an increase in mental health, and mental health is kind of going to be the next wave of all of this. So in order to give more people support, knowing that support looks different during a shutdown and with all the closures, they started the Care Line. It is available during the day. A licensed counselor will talk to you and answer any of your questions and give you support, direct you to support in your area. After hours, it's answered by the National Suicide Lifeline, which is also answered by our local crisis center. Another option, if it's not necessarily mental health, but it is some sort of resource that you're looking for and you don't know where to start, 211, United Way of Stark County, started the 211 number to give people an option instead of looking in the phone book or on Google or on the internet, being able to call for local resources, childcare, food banks, homeless hotline, any sort of resource that you're looking for, they will be able to direct you into the right place. So, I encourage you to reach out. Reach out to your loved ones, your friends, check on them. Hopefully, kind of the strive for 5 that Governor Mike DeWine encouraged, just checking in with people, making sure they're okay, directing them towards these numbers, using these numbers yourself, and just know that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. Asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. If you need any services from Light After Loss, we are a support service for survivors of suicide loss. If you have lost someone to suicide and you need somebody to talk to, you need resources, you need support, we offer those at no cost. Our number is 330-846-3630. You can text or call that number. You can also email us at lightafterlossstark@gmail.com. And encourage you to give a little light if you have it. Take a little light if you need it, so nobody will walk in darkness. Be well.